What's up everyone, my name is Topics and welcome to the Skyreach Dungeon Guide for Midnight Season 1. Before we get started, there are a few things you should know. This guide is meant to help you get started on timing this dungeon early on, so we will cover all boss mechanics and go over important trash abilities, but this guide will not cover any routing or advanced tech or strategies. Skyreach is a 4-boss dungeon with a timer of 33 minutes. This dungeon is actually pretty relaxed utility-wise, and I wouldn't say that there are any hard requirements or suggestions on what you should bring, so the composition for this dungeon should be pretty wide open. Starting off the dungeon, you'll first encounter a Dread Raven. This mob will shoot a player with a Dreadwind and knock them back. Press a defensive for this, and don't be standing near the edge because you will be knocked off. It will also summon AoEs to move out of. Dire Screech pulses AoE damage to the party for 3 seconds. So this Dread Raven should be your priority target because it's going to be the hardest for the group to deal with. In addition to that, there are also the Adorned Blade Talons on this first part. Blade Rush charges the tank and puts a 5-second bleed on them. Dwarf is definitely going to come in handy this season and in this dungeon specifically. The Dread Gale Caller that you find close to the first boss platform does a repel cast. If this goes off, it's going to knock the entire party back a large distance, potentially knocking you off the platform. So these are very important kicks. Make sure you have someone kicking this. Alright, now we've reached the first boss, which only takes a couple minutes to get to in this dungeon. Ranjit. This boss does Gale Surge, which blasts a player with a gust of wind, doing damage and knocking them back. Again, do not be standing on the edge of the platform in this fight. This leaves behind a Coalesced Wind, which does damage if touched, and again, knocks you back. You're going to see a theme with getting knocked back with this boss. Fan of Blades does AoE party damage and leaves a 6-second bleed on the party. Wind Chakram is where the boss throws a wind chakram in a direction marked by an arrow, and it goes out a pretty far distance off the platform and then returns to the boss, doing lethal damage to players in its path. This will probably one-shot you on high keys. Just make sure you watch for the chakram coming back in. The main mechanic is Chakram Vortex. This is where the boss throws a big Chakram Vortex in the middle of the room that does lethal damage and knocks you back if you touch it. During this duration, there's wind vortexes that spin around the room and also do damage and knock you back if hit. So, the name of the game for this fight is literally just dodge everything. Do not get hit by anything on this fight, and you should be fine. After the first boss, you're going to go up these stairs and you're going to encounter the next important mob, the Solar Elemental. This mob does Solar Flare, which spawns AoE puddles to move out of, but it also summons a Solar Orb. Everybody should swap to this orb when it spawns and DPS it before it explodes. If this orb goes off in high keys, it's probably going to wipe the group. The Blinding Sun Priestess, which you'll also find next to this mob, does a blinding light cast that will disorient you if it's not kicked. So just kick this and you should be good. Inside of the room, the Solar Construct does Solar Flame, which is a channel into one player. Make sure, healers, that you're watching this player that's getting targeted with this, because it will probably hit pretty hard. Solar Nova is an AoE circle that you need to move out of. Now you've reached the second boss that will spawn once you've cleared all the trash in this room. Araknath. This boss does Fiery Smash, which is a frontal line that's aimed at the tank and is lethal. Nobody can get hit by this. You can sidestep out of this, so it'll be aimed at the tank, but before the cast finishes, you can just step off to the side and completely dodge this. This cast very, very frequent throughout the fight, so don't forget about this and be aware. Energize. This is where constructs around the arena start to light up, and this is very, very noticeable if you watch the edges of the arena, and then they'll focus light rays into the boss. 3 players need to block these light rays by standing in front of them and soak them so that they do not hit the boss. Anytime one of these light rays connects with the boss, it will inflict fire damage to the party and increase the boss's supernova damage by 5%, which is an upcoming ability. Tanks, you need to be aware of where these light rays are and where your players are soaking them, and make sure that you're pointing the boss away from these. That way, your teammates don't have to worry about dodging a frontal while also soaking these beams, and you should just be continuously pointing the boss away from the party for the entire fight. Heat exhaustion. Once these light rays are done being soaked and they're done channeling, they'll do a frontal that's aimed towards the center of the room, and everybody just needs to move out of these. Supernova is the boss's hardest hitting ability. It does a burst of fire damage to all players, and it increases in power if it has stacks of energize from the light rays not being soaked from before. So if you miss soaks, it's going to buff this supernova cast and probably wipe the group. So as long as you're soaking properly, you'll be able to live this supernova cast. Last but not least, Blast Wave is fire damage to all players, and it also leaves behind a 20-second dot. This only goes off if nobody's in melee range, so tank, just make sure that you're always within melee range of the boss. After the second boss, you'll head up either the left or right side of the stairs, and there's really not a whole lot of trash before the third boss. The second and third boss are very close together. Within this next section, you'll see the Sun Talon Tamer. These mobs do Mark of Death, which is where it charges a player and then marks them for the Skyreach Sun Talons to fixate. So if you get charged to and marked, you're going to get fixated by multiple of the smaller mobs here. So just use roots, CCs, and just don't get hit by these mobs. Now, after this area is cleared, this platform, you'll summon the third boss, Rukhran. This boss does Burning Claws, which is a tank buster that does 2/3 physical damage and 1/3 fire damage, and it leaves behind an 8-second fire dot on the tank. This is probably going to be a defensive every time kind of thing. Sunbreak does fire AoE damage to the group and summons a Sunwing ad, which is just a small bird. This Sunwing fixates a player and does pulsing damage to the group. When this bird dies, it does an 8-yard AoE damage around itself and leaves behind a smoldering egg. Now, the catch with these ads is you want to make sure that you're not kiting them in front of where the tank is fighting the boss, but you also don't want to kite them to the pillar that's in the middle of the room, and I'll get to that later. So where I would recommend kiting these ads and killing them at is somewhere around the center of the room, like in between the boss and the middle pillar. If this ad ever dies and does its 8-yard AoE and blasts an egg that's on the ground from another ad that you killed, it will respawn that ad. So you got to make sure you're not kiting and killing these Sunwing ads on top of each other. Searing Quills is where the boss does lethal AoE fire damage to everybody in its line of sight for 3 seconds. Before this cast starts going off, the whole group needs to move behind the middle pillar so that you're line of sight from the boss. This is why you don't want to drop those smoldering egg ads in the middle of the room by the pillar, because you're going to need to stand there at some point. Last but not least, Screech is lethal damage to the party if nobody is within melee range. And when I mean lethal, I mean lethal. Tank, as soon as the boss is done casting its Searing Quills, you need to use a movement ability to get from the pillar back to over where the boss is. You cannot take your time with this, because if you do not get back to the boss, it's going to do Screech and wipe the group. After the third boss, you're going to take the next flight of stairs up to the next platform, and you're going to encounter the Wind Maze. And oh man, people are going to have fun with this in Pugs. So this Wind Maze is basically constant force that just pushes you back the entire time. You have to run against it, and the way that the wind is blowing you changes depending on where you're at in here. So you kind of go around the edge, and then you have to actually go along the inside circle and then up the stairs. There's birds on the edge of this maze that launch vortexes at you that can knock you off. So you can tell that when these are about to launch, because the birds will start to light up a couple seconds before they throw this vortex. So make sure you don't get hit by these vortexes, and use movement speed abilities or things like a lock gateway, blink, anything that you have to make it easier to get through this maze. But when you do get to the top of the maze, there's a main vortex that you can channel into. When it reaches 100%, as a party, you'll turn off this Wind Maze so you don't have to do it again if somebody dies. Entering to this last room and a couple more flights of stairs, you'll see some familiar mobs that we've already seen before, so I'm not going to go over them again, but you'll see some things like the Adorned Blade Talon, the Solar Elemental, and Dread Ravens on the final platform. But we've already went over those, so let me go ahead and get into the last boss. High Sage Viryx. This boss is actually very simple. It only has 4 mechanics. It's actually one of my favorite bosses. Boss will do Solar Blast, which is a fire damage cast that needs to be kicked. This actually hits very hard, and I think it's going to get into one-shot territory if you miss a kick. So just be very aware of this. Scorching Ray inflicts several players with fire damage and leaves a 5-second fire dot. This is unavoidable. It's just going to constantly happen throughout the fight. There's nothing you can do about this. Cast Down, I would say, is the main mechanic. This is when a zealot will appear above a player and attempt to carry them off the back of the platform. These can be stunned and CC'd, so just swap to this immediately and DPS this down so that you can free your teammate before they get carried off the edge. Lens Flare is a targeted fire damage beam that follows behind a player and leaves behind blazing ground puddles. So we've seen several mechanics like this throughout M+ history where it's like a targeted beam and you just have to kite it around the edge of the room because it drops puddles. This is no different. Just make sure you're taking up as little space as possible. And, you know, the tactic I've seen with this is you kind of start on one side of the room and you just work your way all the way to the other side of the room. The reason why you want to go side to side and not, you know, drop the beam along the back and then end up next to the edge is because you're not going to have any room to fight the zealot. You want to make sure that you can be standing as far away from the edge of the platform as possible at all times so that you have enough time to stun, CC, and kill the zealot. If the zealot ever starts by grabbing someone and you're already close to the edge of the room, it's probably GG. But that will conclude this guide for the Skyreach dungeon in Midnight Season 1. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe if you want more content. I will be releasing dungeon guides for all Midnight Season 1 dungeons. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace. Thank you so much to all of the Patreon members. It's because of your support that I'm able to continue making World of Warcraft and Mythic Plus tank content. I really appreciate it.